Crime Book Festival. We're kicking off today's session with the Ask the Experts panel. I'm Will Templeton. I'm not an expert, but I'll be chairing the session and fielding questions to serving CSI Kate Bendelow and former Senior Detective Graham Bartlett. Welcome, guys.
Good afternoon, Will. Thank you.
I hope you're both well and coping with the lockdown. Have you had any effect on your day-to-day lives?
Well, for me, it's just it's a constant state of limbo, and I don't think I'm ever going to get used to having to queue to get into Tesco. That's quite a challenge. For me, from one of the positives that come out of the situation for me work-wise is we've seen a real decrease in burglaries, so that's a good thing, I suppose, because more people are at home. So yeah, it's keeping the burglars in.
Okay, before we turn to the questions then that we've got, I'd like to start by giving you both the chance to tell us a little bit about your technical backgrounds and how you went from there to become involved in advising writers of crime fiction. Kate, you want to start again?
Yeah, well, I started obviously a crime scene investigator, and when I started writing fiction, I attended Swanwick Writers' School, where I did a presentation for crime writers on understanding crime scene techniques. And it's basically, for me, it's been an absolute dream because I've had the ability to combine my two passions, the passion that I have for my job and the love I have for writing. Then as a result, I wrote, which side are we on? The Real CSI, Forensic Handbook for Crime Writers. I'm currently working on the final edit of my first crime fiction novel as well. So, as I say, for me, it just really is a dream to be able to combine my two passions, which I love. So,
cool. Wonderful. And Graham?
Yeah, well, my background, I was a police officer for 30 years, mainly as a detective and investigating homicides and all serious crime. But also working as the head of police in Brighton and Hove. So I was in charge of all the police in Brighton and Hove. And I got to know someone called Peter James, who no doubt many members will know. And when I retired from the police, started to advise him on his novels around police procedure. Then Peter and I brought out a non-fiction book called Death Comes Knocking. And from that, I seem to have developed a new career in being a police and crime advisor to about 60 authors and TV writers, from people like Peter and Mark Billingham and Ellie Griffiths, who I know was on here yesterday, to novelists and debut novelists as well. So, and it's all about just bringing in the authenticity into people's stories without kind of stripping out all the drama. So the way that Kate and I both work is to combine our writing experiences with our professional experiences and hopefully give people the tools to write really authentic crime fiction.
Wonderful. And you'll be tempted to turn your hand to fiction yourself as well?
Well, like Kate, I've just submitted my first novel to my agent for the second time after some structural edits and reducing it by 15,000 words, which was no mean feat. So I'm definitely wanting to venture into the fiction world, having published 2 non-fictions now. They're hard work non-fictions because you have to make sure everything's true. You can't kill people if you don't like them.
Wonderful. 2 more books to look forward to. Okay. Right. Well, we've got a number of questions that have been collected from the group page that I'll put to you now. Hopefully there'll be more coming in as we're live that we'll be able to get to as well, maybe. First of all, I must apologise to our members because when I copied the questions over, I didn't include the names of the people asking. So thanks to anybody who did get involved and ask the questions, and keep asking them while we're on now. So here we go. Somebody would like to ask ask what authors get wrong, and have you ever watched a TV show or read a book that was so off the mark that you swore out loud?
Shall I go first on that? I've got a list as long as your arm of things that authors get wrong all the time, and it's not because they intend to get things wrong or shortcuts, just that they don't know. So some examples are people being demoted from CID. CID is not a promotion. You get moved, so it's not a kind of there's not a reward system around that. The over optimistic expectations people have of technology. You know the scenes where people go in, put a USB stick in the back of a 1 gigabyte terabyte computer and download it while the owner's in the toilet. Things like that. I could go on forever. The way police officers address one another, all this kind of shouty surname stuff, it doesn't happen. And I, for one, if I didn't know anyway, once I'd heard Kate talk about crime scene management, then I definitely wouldn't make some of the mistakes I see, because Kate's quite scary when she talks about that. You want to say something about people traipsing over your crime schemes?
That is one of my biggest bugbears, and it's something that I think it annoys me more when you see it on programs that you watch crime dramas, and it's when you see the crime scene investigators in the background with the white scene suits on, all suited up on the stepping plates, and then the detective goes in and barely snaps on a pair of gloves and starts rummaging around collecting things. For me, that's the most frustrating thing, because one of the most common misconceptions is that the detective collects evidence from the crime scene. Surprisingly, it's actually the crime scene investigators who collect evidence from the crime scene. So that's the one thing that does really, really have me swearing at the television. And especially when you see them coming in and, worst of all, picking things up with a pen, moving things with a pen.
Those sorts of things are simply resolved. It's just knowing, and I know, like on TV, that they like to see the actors' faces. Well, you can have a little bit of a poetic license on that, but it is this kind of like, poor old Vera who snaps on her overshoes and then doesn't shed any DNA as she wanders through the crime.
All right, thank you. What was the first case that got you interested? Who wants to field that one? Have you got any ideas about that?
Interested in? I don't know whether it's interested in being a detective or interested in writing. I'm going to take the first one. Interested in being a detective. Do you think so?
Go with that. It's not clear on the question, but go with that.
No. I mean, for me, it was I was involved when I was a PC at Police Constable at Gatwick Airport. I was involved in a very long-running operation to try and catch some baggage loaders who were stealing from mailbags on a flight that went on a nightly basis from Gatwick to Edinburgh or Glasgow, one of the Scottish airports. And it was the first time I really saw covert techniques in place. And my crime investigation background had basically been around arresting shoplifters and people for assaults in pubs up to that point. But it was this kind of slowly catch a monkey kind of approach. And I really, I think we were on that for a couple of months or something like that, on and off. And it really grabbed me about, actually, this is an area of policing that I really want to go into. And then it just kind of took off from there, really. And I became a detective when I went down to Brighton in 1990 and stayed more or less a detective right the way through my career.
Well, excellent. Kate, do you have a similar story?
Yeah. For me, there's no specific, I've not got a specific case example like Graham has. For me, I'll never forget the feeling when I first started as a CSI and got my first fingerprint identification from a theft from motor vehicle. And even now, after 18 years, when I think of all the major scenes I've worked on, some really big scenes, some murder cases, some nasty robberies and rape scenes and stuff, just that feeling, whether it is a murder or a burglary, when you get notification that some DNA or fingerprints you've recovered from the crime scene come back and have identified an offender, that is an absolutely overwhelming feeling. It really, really is. It's that sort of, that gives you the justification at times, as hard as a job can be. It reminds you why you do the job you do. Knowing that you've caught somebody and you've helped people, that for me is a brilliant feeling and always will be.
Nope. Got a little question popped up there to follow on from what you were saying earlier. Can you explain why people don't use with pens?
Yeah, well, I was referring to fiction crime dramas when people, detectives will walk in and move items round. at a crime scene, as I say, the crime scene investigators are the ones responsible for recovering evidence. Everything's photographed and then it's recovered sequentially and is detailed at every stage and exhibited. So if, for example, the detective pulls a pen that they've had tucked behind the ear that they've been chewing on all day and starts poking things around in a crime scene, then obviously, effectively, then they're going to be leaving their DNA on evidence in a crime scene.
And the other thing about that is that, you know, detectives know this, and they are really, really cautious in real life. I mean, nowadays the sensitivity around DNA is mind blowing. So they know not to do those things. So when you get, you know, very experienced detectives in novels or on TV doing things like that, it just completely sort of demeans the profession, and it's not necessary. There's no need for them to do that. You know, they will go to the crime scene. They can point to things and ask the CSI about them and make sure they're all photographed and everything. But it's quite demeaning when you've got somebody that is, you know, eventually going to crack the case, shifting things around with pens, as Kate says, that have got their DNA all over them.
What do you say? Going the opposite end from that previous question, what's the most boring part of the job?
Can I start with that one? I'd say it's awful to say. There's a stigma around CSI that it's a really, really exciting job. And don't get me wrong, it is. It has its moments. I've been fortunate enough to work on some amazing cases. The reality of it is it can be very, very tedious and backbreaking. We can spend hours in a scene, which usually they're dirty, they smell, they're never pleasant conditions. Wearing a scene suit for any length of time can become very uncomfortable, especially if the weather's warm, because you get so hot in them. You've got the masks on, the hoods up, or the hairnets on, double gloves. It's backbreaking. It can be tedious because we're recovering trace evidence, so we'll be taking random swabs or tape lifts, and you can be doing that for hours. You might be needed a wee for hours. You might be hungry. So I'd say, I don't know if boring's the right word as such, but just more tedious. But then that said, the motivation that you're investigating a murder and somebody's died, what more motivation do you need to sort of carry on pushing through the boring bits, if you like, than that?
Yeah, and I think that mindset is sort of cuts across into the detective as well, because, you know, there are some stuff that, you know, there's you know, I'd say to a lot of authors, you know, don't include everything in you, because some of it is mind numbing, it really is, but it's all necessary. But I think where the bureaucracy is unnecessary, where you are filling in forms just to be able to justify a cost or to support you know, a particular strategy or performance or whatever it might be. That's what officers find really, really, really kind of pointless. And so, you know, in building a murder file, there's a huge amount of, you know, sitting behind desks and filling in forms and pulling papers together and double checking continuity of exhibits, and that's not dramatic. I mean, that's quite dull, but actually, you know, behind them, they know, well, all this will go towards, you know, hopefully a conviction at the end of it, which all comes back to the family, and the family having seeing justice. But I always say to writers, you know, a lot of writers become quite fixated by having senior officers as their protagonists, you know, detective superintendents or detective chief inspectors, because they're the senior investigating officer. That role is quite passive in terms of drama. You know, that role is kind of running the whole inquiry. It's very office based. It's very kind of recording all the decisions and making sure that everything's done. They're not out there kicking doors in, arresting suspects, interviewing people. And I say to authors, just, you know, if you notch your protagonist down a couple of ranks, have them as a sergeant or an inspector, they can do all the exciting things you want them to do, and have a little bit of sort of freedom to be able to make their own decisions as well. So it's very important for me to get rank right, because you know, the higher up you go, the duller it becomes.
Well, are there internal hierarchies that people on the outside have no idea about? And there's an example here: paramedics acting superior over crime scene techs.
Oh, okay.
I've never experienced anything like that. I've certainly never had met a paramedic. at the end of the day, we in the job we do, because of what we do, we work closely with a lot of other agencies. So obviously, paramedics, fire investigators, we all have our own different unique skill set. And I think I found the opposite of the question that's posed. I found the opposite. We're all very respectful of what we do, and rely on each other's expertise in those areas. So I'd say no to that one. I don't know how you feel about that, Graham.
Yeah, I mean, the policing nowadays is very used to working in partnership. I suppose the only hierarchies, it says internal hierarchies. I mean, there's lots of internal kind of tension that you can build on as writers, and you can exploit people's relationships across one another, and it's not always based on the rank. But I suppose if we're looking at kind of the hierarchies between agencies, I think it probably comes into its own when there's a major disaster, like a terrorist incident or a major incident, or natural disaster or something like that, where particularly when you get the police and the military working together, because both are used to being in charge. Both are used to being the ones that calls the shots, and all of a sudden they're having to work together to an aim. And very often, if it's a civil disaster, then it's the police that are in charge. But sometimes those dynamics do kind of cause a rub, and it's not all about careers and profile or anything like that. It's just each other are used to being the boss and want to carry on being like that. But generally, this is important for writers, but generally agencies work together, particularly around safeguarding and health and safety and that sort of thing. There are good, well sort of thought out arrangements to help agencies work well together, playing to their strengths.
Thank you. We've got another question on the screen there. Do you think it matters if crime fiction isn't always crime fact? It's a big deal that things go wrong.
Well, I think that there's more to this question than actually a yes or no. I mean, crime fiction cannot be factual. Cannot.
No.
It's too dull. It's too long-winded. You'll lose your audiences. But what you can do with crime fiction is you can have authentic procedures, authentic characters, and authentic timelines that will carry your story forward. So it's not necessarily about getting every detail right, but it's about avoiding getting it wrong.
It's getting the facts and then using a little bit of poetic license, isn't it? I think for me, as long as it's not glaringly obvious that something is skewed, then we can always stretch the boundaries, can't we? We say that, don't we, Graham? That we can always, if somebody gives you a sort of a storyline, you can always stretch techniques to make it fit.
Yeah, and quite often we'll do that. We'll just kind of we'll go, well, that under the circumstances that you've described so far, that wouldn't happen. However, if we go back, a chapter or two and put in a bit of conversation around this, or just tweak that little bit of procedure, then what you now want to do becomes credible and authentic. And but the thing is, you have to know, as Kate says, it's about poetic license, but you have to know what you're veering from. The deep, so you know how it happens, and then you can then take a creative decision as to how far you veer from that. That's where we help.
What's the most unusual crime scene you have attended? By unusual, I mean in terms of the method or weapon used for the murder. Kate, you want to deal with that one? Can you think of one?
I think I'm struggling to think of a particular one that was unusual. I mean, Graham will agree with me with this. I think with any murder, you sort of walk in, sort of scratching your head, trying to put the pieces together with the facts you've got and then the scene in front of you. So some scenes of, I wouldn't even say they were not murders, but we've had some sudden deaths which we've gone in scratching our heads thinking, is this suspicious or it's not? And there's been quite a few that have transpired not to be suspicious, but because of the position the deceased has been in or the circumstances they've been found. I can recall one death where the fire brigade were the first emergency responders, And the fire brigade, being the fire brigade, they got into the house and started moving, throwing couches and furniture around to get to this guy who was dead on the living room floor. And so when we followed up as police and crime scene investigators, the fire brigade had been on nights, they'd gone off duty, and we're left with a deceased male in a house that looked like it had been, the living room had been thrown around. So that was a little bit, well, this is a bit suspicious. We later speak to the fire brigade and see their body cam as to what they've done, and it's like, now that would make sense why they've moved. I think Graham will agree. I mentioned this point because we were talking, I suppose it goes with the previous question about hierarchies and stuff. There's a lot of banter between the police, paramedics and the fire brigade. Wouldn't you agree with that, Graham? There's friendly banter, but particularly the fire brigade are known for throwing things around.
And they throw water on everything, which can be quite
everything, yeah.
But no, I mean, and Kate's right. And if you're writing fiction, just because there aren't any kind of systemic hierarchies, you can always introduce friction between an individual fire incident commander and a senior investigating officer or a senior crime officer. You can always introduce those personality clashes. I mean, I suppose my answer to the question about unusual crime scene would be the one where we had a definite and credible report that somebody had been murdered and was in a cupboard in a house, and we got there and the body wasn't there, and it took us 3 weeks to find the body. In which time the offender had been charged with murder. We found the body in several pieces about 40 miles away in some fields over in East Sussex. And it was, investigating a bodiless murder is so difficult because you're constantly trying to prove a negative. You're trying to prove an absence of life, basically. So, you're constantly having to go back to bank records and phone records and things like that. And this was in the 90s and or in the early noughties, and it was really, really difficult. But I have been known, I'm going to say this before Kate says it, I have been known to miss a bullet wound in someone's head before.
I'm glad you brought that up.
That was unusual. That was unusual. And it was something that I is reminded of on a daily basis by people like Kate and others. So we've all got flaws, me more than others.
Well, what has changed from when you first entered the field until now? Who wants to go with that one?
Technology, definitely. Mobile phones, computers, CCTV, ANPR, all the technology we've got available. I think it's mind-blowing, and for a technophobe like me, I'm still struggling to get my head around a lot of what we do, but it's brilliant now from an investigative perspective. Certainly like things like ANPR cameras, and even now various certain vehicles, you can track the whereabouts. If you've got a black box on, you know where the vehicle's been, what speed it's been driving. All of that is brilliant intelligence to a murder investigation. And the people, the work they can do with analysing phones and computers, that sort of stuff. Even EFIT as well. EFIT technology's improved. And an example of that is if there's a murder scene now, the people in our imaging unit have the software where rather than exposing members of the jury to graphic post-mortem photographs, which they would have had to show them in the past, they can now superimpose photographs from the post-mortem and overlay it on a sort of almost cartoon image of a body, if you like. So it's not as shocking when they see it.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And that can become certainly the technical sort of surveillance that we're all under all the time. That can be quite a blockage for crime writers, because you want your you don't want your criminal caught within the first sort of 5,000 words. You want to leave it at least 90,000 words or whatever. So I just noticed on the stream somebody asking about should we be referencing body-worn cameras as well, and I think that comes into the same thing. I mean, there's a huge amount of technology out there. Generally, uniform officers and on occasions detectives will wear and deploy body-worn video. So that's good in terms of being able to capture that initial evidence and the initial state of the scene and things like that. Picture paints 1,000 words. But if you look at the opportunities there are for crime detection, those opportunities are also there for criminals as well to be able to keep under the radar using technology. Most criminals know that we can track mobile phones. Most criminals know about DNA. So you can pit your protagonist and your antagonist against each other using technology as a kind of tool in that, rather than thinking, oh God, I can't write more crime novels because everything's on CCTV and everyone's phone's tracked and everyone's wearing body-worn video. So it's about kind of using it on both sides.
Okay, Leslie Thompson. We always see fictional detectives being stressed to re-pressure to get a result. Really, rarely scared they'll fail. Is that something you've known techs feel?
I think there's. So I go with this, Kate. First of all, I think there's always a pressure to get to get a result. I think there's always a pressure to put the best possible case that you can to the CPS and allow them all the tools that are available to them to prosecute. It is a bit of a myth that there is a kind of personal consequence of not guilty verdicts. There isn't. Because providing the investigation has been carried out fully and ethically and it gets to court, quite frankly, that's all the police can do. If there's if things come up in the trial, obviously that the evidence wasn't quite as it seemed, then there could be personal consequences. But it's not a real personal pressure. The pressure is actually about delivering justice for the families. And if you watch these Fly on the Wall documentaries, you'll hear real senior investigating officers talking about delivering justice for the family. No one wants to have a guilty person walk free. So that's where the pressure comes. It's not really about, and certainly no one gets promoted or demoted on the back of a case well done or a failed case.
I think if I can just add to that as well, I think it is one of the other most common misconceptions, particularly in crime fiction, and I think it's worth emphasising that in a real life murder investigation, there's so many people involved. It is a big team of people who contribute to that, rather than one person actually feeling all the weight and the responsibility.
No, very true.
What is the most annoying question that you get? Presumably from authors wanting to get the novels finished. Graham?
Well, that one is the most annoying question you get, because it's hard to think of an annoying one, because they're all genuine questions. They're all genuine. Authors want to know. I think for me, it's more about presumptions. Around. I talked a minute ago about people's careers standing or falling on one investigation, and I think it's also about, sometimes you do get some authors that want to push the envelope really on particularly on crime scene management. So they'll want private investigators going into the crime scene, or private investigators sitting in the interviews.
That's one of my big bugbears.
Pardon? Was that Kate?
I said that's one of my big. That's one of my bugbears, trying to get private investigators into crime scenes.
Yeah, I mean, we had one the other day that I just checked through with Kate about, a defence solicitor going into a crime scene. It's just really this kind of, but I want it to happen. I want it. Well, okay, well, don't put my name in the back of the book as being your advisor if you want it to happen. But it is, it is I can understand it, because people sometimes, they've got this great story in their mind, and then, things like that, we will say, well, it couldn't happen, but we'll always find a way that it can happen. But some people are, well, I want it to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. So that's it for me, really. It's it's the kind of insistence around not looking more laterally around what they want to achieve.
Do you have a response as well, Kate, or just go along with?
Not so much a question from authors, but the question generally you get from people when they find out you're a crime scene investigator. Sometimes you get the question, "Oh, what's the worst thing you've ever dealt with?" And I can't stand that question, because I think it's actually quite crass and a little bit insensitive, you know, to sort of, well, I'm just going to stand and talk to you about one of the things that's probably messed me up a little bit in the past. I really don't like that question. Please don't ask me that, because I will pretend I've not heard you.
I'll cross that off the. When did you know that this was what you wanted to do? So we'll go for what sort of age were you when you sort of first got interested in this?
Do you want to go first, Kate? Or?
Yeah, I think this is quite bizarre. I remember probably being about age 7, being out walking to the shops with my mum and my brother and seeing a dead cat at the side of the road and being absolutely fascinated and wanting to stand and look at it, to look at its injuries, and mum was horrified and dragging me away. And I think that's probably when the penny dropped that was a bit odd. I also remember my brother had the Ladybird book of nature and being absolutely fascinated with one of the pages. There was a beautiful, a bit sick. There's a beautiful drawing of maggots, and again, being absolutely fascinated with them. So yeah, as I say, probably always been a little bit strange.
You've got to be a certain sort of person to be a soccer. You really have.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, I was, you know, I can't remember a time when I didn't want to be in the police. You know, I've got a bit of a family history in the police. It was something that I always wanted to do. My mum was quite worried because I didn't have a plan B. And she said, well, what if you don't get in? I said, well, there's 42 forces in the country. Surely one of them will take me eventually. That was my, you know, so I always wanted to do it. And, you know, why did I want to do it? I mean, you know, there was something about, you know, seeing people in my family that I really respected, you know, doing really good things and helping people. And, but also I just, you know, if I'm honest, I just wanted some excitement. I didn't want to sit in an office, which is what I ended up doing, but sitting in an office, you know, counting paper clips. I wanted to go out there and actually do something useful. And I didn't really have any ambition as to where I wanted to go in the police, whether I'm, you know, promotion or specialism. I just kind of found my way as I went through. So yeah, that was my, you know, it's always been there for me.
My biggest driver as well is I always wanted to be in a job where you were helping people. That was really important to me. That's your motivation to get up every morning and want to get to work and do your job. And as well for me, it's just nice to be out and about and to work with the public so much. I mean, Graham, you'll appreciate this. Some of the weird and wonderful things you see and experiences when you go in other people's houses and you see how other people live. That is just amazing. That, you know, that's one of the things I really, really love about the job.
Mm. Yeah. Nothing surprises you after a while. You just take people, the way people live their lives as they are, and just try and solve their problems. But yeah. That's why crime fiction is such a popular genre, because there are an infinite number of strange and wonderful situations that people can get themselves into.
I think we can probably both relate to circumstances as well, Graham, where if we try to include them in our books, the editor would turn around and say, you can't include that. People would never believe that would happen. I think we can both count lots of strange cases where when you try to tell people, it's so shocking. It is unbelievable. Yeah.
And I've had with the novel that I've submitted to my editor. The first time I sent it to my agent, she came back and there was something in there that she said, can you tone that down a little bit, because that's not, you know, people won't believe that. And I was thinking, actually, that is so close to what actually happened, you know, and I'm using something. So I did tone it down in the end, because I thought I'm not having, you know, I get the point. But yeah, fact is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, absolutely.
How long does it take to get CCTV results, e.g. if searching urgently for a vulnerable missing person?
Well, instantly.
Who's best?
Yeah, instantly. You can, you know, most CCTV now is digital. You'll see it again. I do recommend people, if people are writing crime fiction, I do recommend them to watch as many fly on the wall documentaries as they can, because you really, you know, they are very, very good these days. You know, they're not kind of all blue lights and people scrapping on the floor outside nightclubs. Some of it is, but the CCTV, CCTV can be accessed immediately from the rake. You know, can you check CCTV around this area? They can go, you know, they can go back sort of to the police station or wherever the CCTV centre is and ask for other cameras to be viewed, and and sort of reviewed and then sort of knit things together. I mean, in terms of sort of providing a CCTV kind of story around somebody, that does take a bit longer because you have to use multiple cameras, not just publicly owned cameras, but also privately owned cameras. So there's a lot of work in terms of kind of crocheting really all of that footage together. And sometimes you see the result and you think, oh, that was easy, but it wasn't. It's hours and hours and hours of footage. But for a vulnerable missing person, they can get onto it straight away and look at multiple screens.
We were talking before.
Can you commandeer? You talk about the private CCTV. Can you actually sort of commandeer that, or do you expect people to volunteer it to you?
I've never come across a time where we've had to kind of, force somebody to give it, and I'm not quite sure what the powers would be, but certainly, there is a way of asking for things. And people have CCTV for, because they want to prevent crime or detect crime. So I can't remember a time when we've been refused CCTV. Sometimes in the old days when it used to be on video tapes and DVDs, people used to kind of talk about the cost of those. So obviously we'd just replace the cost of that and then give them the footage back when we could. But no, it's never been a problem to my knowledge at all.
Sorry, Kate, you were about to.
Yeah, I was just going to add into that as well. We were talking before about improvements and sort of technology being one of the things that's improved and sort of been a massive step up since I joined. One of the good things for us now, if we have vulnerable missing people reported, all frontline police staff and police officers have handheld devices, whether they're iPads or mobile phones, laptops, that sort of stuff. So now if we have a vulnerable missing person in our area, we can basically be issued on our devices with a picture of that person. So obviously it's gold dust for us because people are out and about. Even somebody like me, I'm not a police officer, but I am out and about in the area where I know that missing person is. To be able to have a photograph pinged to your mobile phone and know who you're looking for is really, really useful.
Question here from Alex. How have you both coped with the transition from investigating to writing about it? Kate, you want to start at the start?
Yeah, I've been heard quote many times since the book I'm working on now to say it is so much easier to investigate a real life murder than it is to fictionally create one. Definitely. I think it's sometimes, I don't know if you found this, Graham, sometimes the fact that you know too much makes it harder. I probably, if I was advising somebody, I would give them the poetic license, I suppose, that I don't afford myself. So it's, I'm getting there now, but it has been a bit of a struggle.
Yeah, and you have to invent everything that goes on around it. If you're investigating a crime, you kind of take the information, the intelligence, and the evidence as it comes to you, and you make sense of it. I'm not saying it's easy at all. It's not easy, but in writing it, you have to create all your characters. You have to create all your, all the lines of inquiry, the red herrings, and all of that. I mean, investigating crime is far more important than writing about it. There's real things at stake, and writing about it is just making stuff up. But I fall into the same trap as Kate has just said, in that if you know too much, you can want to write it all down. And I, on my novel, I've had to strip out a number of functions, a number of characters, because the cast was just too big and there was too much going on. And I kind of stopped myself when I was about to say, yeah, but that's how it happened, because that is how it happened. But no one's interested in that. No, we want to know, who our few main characters were. We want to go through the journey with our few main characters, and see see what's in their way. So yeah, it's far harder. The stakes are higher to investigate crime, but it's tricky as well to invent it.
Graham, how did you end up being Peter James's go-to officer for help? Which is Kate too.
Before I took on, I met Peter when I was the deputy divisional commander at Brighton and Hove. So, and he had an arrangement with the police that he could come in and speak to the police, and we were, there were parameters around what he could see and what we talked about. So I got to know him when I came into that role. I got to know him through that, we became good friends, and that continued for about 5 years while I was that role, and then the next role, and then when I retired, he said, well, because people who read his books, they know that he's an absolute stickler for the detail, for the procedure, and he said, would you help me on that? And there's another officer or ex-officer as well that helps him, Dave Gaylor, but David retired sometime more previous, so he wants someone a bit more current. So I started doing that on his books, going through his books, helping him develop plots, characters, that sort of thing. And it just sort of worked from there, really. And now I review and critique all of his manuscripts probably 2 or 3 times before they're published, and come up with different ways of achieving what he wants to achieve. And I now do that, as I say, for other authors as well. But it's a huge privilege to work with someone like that, and then to co-author a book with him as well. So I can't believe my luck sometimes.
And Kate, how did you get involved with advising for authors?
The authors I've been advising with, I think mainly come across through Graham. Graham's been dealing with authors who have had forensic questions, and he's sort of passed them my way. In addition to that, there's a couple of people who either friends or have come to know through social media who I've had the pleasure of reading through their manuscripts and advising them. Just hearing Graham talk, we appreciate Graham's living the dream there. I've had the pleasure of reading some brilliant manuscripts and advising on some stuff, but how wonderful to be the person who reads Peter James's manuscript. You're a very lucky guy, Graham.
So that was a strange noise in my kitchen there.
Not being burgled, I will.
So I'm going to policeman when you want one, can you? Okay, expanding on that. What are we expanding on? Do you ever worry about writing something that might create a perfect crime? Giving people ideas, I think that means.
I don't think there is. I don't think it would be possible really to commit the perfect crime these days, because of all the advances in DNA and CCTV and everything. It's really, really hard to get away with, isn't it?
It is. We said earlier on, we all leave traces wherever we can. Be that we go down to the shops, although we shouldn't be going down to the shops too often now, obviously. But also shedding our DNA is so difficult. So I don't think I would ever worry about creating the perfect crimes. I don't want my crimes to be perfect. I want someone to get caught. So there's always showing them those chinks. And also there are certain things that certain tactics that I won't divulge. I can't divulge, because when I was in the police, I signed the Official Secrets Act, and so there's certain things that I won't divulge. So within that, there might always be, if you think you commit the perfect crime, there might be one of those little things that I've held back from you that you actually was going to get you caught at the end of the day. But no, I'm not. It's not something that bothers me really, because I don't think it could happen. Not in a murder. You could create you could commit the perfect shoplifting, because the resources aren't thrown into it quite the same as murder. But no one's right about shoplifting, so I think we're okay on that.
Right. Huh. Do you believe in gut feelings? And how accurate do you think they would be? A lot of novels rely on the protagonist's gut feelings. So, do you think that's a real thing?
I think it's a real thing. Every case you investigate, obviously you have to make sure there's no unconscious bias. But certainly for me, I believe very much in following your instinct and trusting your instinct when I'm at a scene and you're interpreting something, and just allowing yourself to sort of have a sense for what's right and what, you know, sometimes on the occasions where I trusted my instinct, it seems it's because I've recognised it's not so much what you find there, it's noticing things that are missing. So yeah, for me, I would definitely say instinct and gut feeling. You'd be daft if you ignored it. So it's very plausible to have a protagonist who's got that gut feeling, and that's their motivation to follow it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it starts as a gut feeling. When I used to say to officers, you know, that used to work under me, listen to those gut feelings, listen to those kind of nagging voices in your head that's saying something's not quite right, I'm not quite sure about that, and actually then try and strip them back and, okay, what is it? You know, why do I not think that? Because there'll always be something. You know, your instincts are far quicker than your other senses, and you know, there'll always be something, as Kate said, you know, what is missing? You know, why is there, you know, why are there, I don't know, 3 dinner plates and 2 glasses? You know, something like that will open it up for you, and then just being able to then allow that to develop in terms of what your approach is going to be. That's what a gut feeling is. It's actually an instinct, and it's just really listening to that and recognizing why you've had that, and then following it.
Do you worry about repercussions for you and your loved ones when you are investigating and working on a high-profile case? Have you got any response to that?
For me, the only time there's been occasions where I've been working on a crime scene and the press have turned up and they've started trying to video or photograph them, and if it's obviously local to me, I always make sure, say to them, whatever you do, don't get my face on, because fortunately it's never been an issue, and hopefully it won't be. What about you, Graham?
Yeah, I mean, I've never. I mean, you get loads of idiots will kind of threaten you and know where you live, and you know, we're going to come around and do this, that, and the other to your family. But it is all bluster. But you know, you take precautions. I mean, you know, in the old days, you know, your ex-directory, you're not on the public voters register. You know, you try and protect your address and protect. I mean, just by the way it was, I never worked in the same town that I lived in. Not far away, but I never worked in Brighton. I never lived in Brighton. I always lived just slightly out of Brighton. So I was when I had children, when my wife had children, I was very conscious that it could be an issue, but never really any more than just being a bit cautious. Now, my son has just joined the police and is just coming to the end of his initial training, so he's about to go out in the street. So I'm absolutely terrified for him about, you know, him dealing with high-profile incidents, what's going to happen to him. But I didn't really give a monkeys about myself, so I'm more worried as a dad than I am as an officer.
I'm assuming this relates to fiction. How frustrated do you get when the murderer is one of the police or is targeting a member of the police? That does seem to be a bit of a trope these days, that the police sort of get, the investigating officer gets sort of targeted by the criminal, and there's a lot of it about. Does it bother you, or I can't imagine it happens too often in real life?
I mean, it doesn't happen too often. It doesn't bother me, because for me, it's all about the credibility, about how that's built up, and you know, for example, you know, if the killer was a police officer on the inquiry, providing that that's credible and they're not kind of overtly accessing information on the inquiry and, you know, really putting themselves above the parapet and not getting found out, then it's fine. I think it's all about how that situation is narrated and what the characters are doing around it, more than the actual outcome of it being a police officer or somebody targeted by the police. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are officers around the country that are targeted. You know, it doesn't happen very often at all. You know, and we see some very tragic cases. You know, some where they're targeted just because they're police officers. And obviously, in Kate's Force area a few years ago, there was a dreadful tragedy with the 2 officers that were murdered when attending a burglary, or supposedly a burglary. So it does happen. But for me, it's all about the credibility of you know, what would have happened, and whether somebody actually would have spotted it beforehand.
Oh, hang on, that's the same question again. Do you? Oh, this would be more for Graham. Do you keep in touch with current professionals to keep your information up to date?
Yeah, very, very much so. Yeah, there are a number of people that I will contact. You know, we've talked about how quickly things change, particularly technologically and scientifically. So there are a number of people. I mean, Kate's obviously one of them. A number of people that I keep in contact with just to verify, you know, what I'm thinking and you know, the advice that I'm giving. Also, you know, through my network on my website, I've got a range of people that have got specific specialities around particular things, so kidnapping, offender profiling, scenes of crime, obviously. So it's really important to keep current and to keep to keep the advice credible, because you know you kind of move out of an organisation and sometimes you don't know when things have changed. So there's a lot of checking that goes on at my end that the authors don't always see.
Kate, obviously you're up to date anyway. I've got another question on screen here.
Trying to be.
Do you always work well together, or do you butt heads during investigations? How do you handle it? Now then, so I mean, Kate, do you get on well with the investigating officers?
Yeah, we do. I mean, it's very much, like I mentioned before, it's very much a teamwork. So if we say, for example, we're working on a murder investigation, a strategy is devised between the senior investigating officer and agreed with the crime scene manager. There are occasions where you might, I wouldn't say butt heads, that's a bit strong. There are maybe occasions where you have a disagreement, and even murder investigations aside, sometimes we might have a case where the detective will come into the office and say, they use a term we hate, which is just go and forensicate everything. And it's like, well, no, we don't work like that. We need to know the case we're dealing with and specifically what we're looking at. We don't just recover everything for the sake of it in certain cases. So we sort of ask them to be a little bit more comprehensive in what they're asking us to go and collect. And sometimes we can have a few tense conversations, but to say we butt heads is a little bit strong. It's just sort of sometimes we need to remind them that we've got the expertise and the knowledge, and to sort of trust us that we know what sort of best evidence we can get from our scenes, if you like.
Yeah.
Graham, have you ever told anybody to go ahead and forensicate a crime scene?
Yeah, because that's what it is. You know, just taking a bit of distance around, that's all you do. But no, seriously, there is. I mean, you know, if you're writing it, then you know you can have personality clashes. Definitely, you can have. You know, you can introduce professional disagreements that get out of hand. But there is none of this kind of Bartlett, Bendelow, my office, and all this kind of shouty stuff. It doesn't happen. But I mean, Kate and I did Kate Neil White and Mel McGrath and I did a thing at Harrogate 2 years ago. Kate and I staged a briefing. We set up a crime scene and staged a briefing, and we deliberately introduced into that a little bit of tension because you know I've got my priorities as a senior investigating officer. You know, I want to find out who's done this, you know, really quickly because you know we've got a killer out there. And Kate quite rightly wants to kind of just slow things down and to apply the right scientific processes, and sometimes that can create a little bit of a rub. So we deliberately introduced that to the briefing. It wasn't a fallout, but it was a kind of no, you know, I'd like you to do this. You go, well, if you do that, this is going to happen, and you know, so there's lots of opportunity, but there's not the kind of butt heading and personal rivalry that you see often on TV and reading crime fiction.
In real life, and I suppose it's just human nature. The number of times we get to a scene and we're asked by officers how long it's going to be. And it is, I say, it's just human nature, but it can be quite, it sort of just puts the pressure on a little bit. And it's like, it's a case of it takes as long as it needs to take. But they're like, yeah, but how long? And you can't quantify in minutes how long it's going to take the process, like Graham says, scientifically recovering stuff and making sure you recover stuff, using, following best practice techniques. So yeah, but that's more human nature than butting heads. We just politely tell them just to roll back and sit in your car, and I'll give you a shout when I've done. And then swear as they walk away.
Kate, somebody called Graham Bartlett said to ask what you can and can't get DNA from.
What you can and can't get DNA. Yeah, there's good sources and there's bad sources of DNA. So obviously good sources are going to be things like blood, saliva, semen, mucus, that sort of stuff. Bad sources of DNA are things like vomit, feces, urine, more the waste products. The good sources of DNA have a nucleus in, which is where the DNA profile is obtained from. Poor sources don't have a nucleus. It's mitochondrial DNA, which can be traced down the maternal line. Mitochondrial DNA can be used more for tracing family members and that sort of stuff. That's not to say if I was at a murder investigation, I have in the past collected feces as part of the murder investigation, just purely because poor sources of DNA, although we can't profile them now, how do we know we might be able to process them in another 10 years? And if you're working on a murder investigation, why would you not just take anything anyway, just to be on the off chance? The particular case we were dealing with at the time, we had an idea about who our offenders possibly were, but we also had potentially a number of outstanding offenders. So for me, I would recover something that's poor. It's not ever going to be profiled now, but as I say, I'm always mindful of sort of 10 years from now if you do a cold case review. But I have had some crime writers asking me if they can use, say, dandruff as a source of DNA at a crime scene, and that's something that is a poor source of DNA. To get something like that profiled, you would need a hell of a lot. So if you're going to look for sources of DNA, I would recommend to crime writers go with your good sources and look at how you can leave them. So saliva you can deposit on drinks vessels, cigarette ends, hair with roots can be found in hats, that sort of stuff. So just be mindful of the good and bad sources and how you're going to plant them in the scenes.
Ooh. And Graham, Kate Bendelow asks, what are your priorities as an SIO when you call to a murder scene?
I mean, the big question is, who's this victim? Why have they been killed here in this way and at this time? That drives everything really. So identification of the victim, identification of any suspects. But in terms of the kind of the here and now, the fast track actions, it's about identifying and securing any degradable or time limited evidence. So that might be forensics, for example. It might be CCTV. It might be witnesses. So if you've got I remember a murder outside a pub in Hove, and we had two issues there. One, it's pouring with rain, and it's really difficult to secure forensically the scene. But also we had hundreds of people around there who could have all been witnesses, and it was a case of we've got to find out who these people are, what they saw, whether they were suspects themselves. So it's about trying to kind of freeze time really, forensically, technologically, and through witnesses, to sort of identify where your best evidence is going to come from, because you can never roll back. You can never come back from that. If you let all your witnesses go, or you let all your forensics wash down the drain, or CCTV is overwritten, or cars, ANPR sort of disappears, then you can never recover that. So they're the priorities. It's about securing that in order to find out why this victim at this time, in this manner, in this place. Well,
looking at the clock, we're getting close to the finish. So to do things back to a personal footing, what do either of you like to do when there's not a lockdown in place in your own time in terms of hobbies and interests? Kate?
Reading. I read lots and lots and lots, so I'm always reading. Ideally, if the weather's nice, I'll be in the garden. that's pretty much it. Just time with family, with the kids, that sort of stuff. Once lockdown is open, I will look forward so much to going to a restaurant and a pub again. But yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, readings, obviously. I mean, I think we're probably all on this on this particular Facebook group because we love reading. So reading's obvious. Walking the dog, keeping fit, although it doesn't look like it at the moment. But you know, running, going to the gym, and avoiding DIY is my main. So dreadful of it.
Right. Well, thank you very much, then, Kate and Graham. It's been a fascinating, insightful discussion today. On behalf of the
another hour.
I mean, talking for hours.
If
If people want to sort of DM me with questions, or you know, look further up, you know, the services that we offer, then please do.
On behalf of the UK Crime Book Club, I'd like to thank you again for taking part.
Thank you.
And to everyone out there in the interwebs, thanks for watching. And don't forget to return at 3 o'clock for the Irish Crime Panel. And for details of that and the rest of the festival, follow the hashtag UKCBC Fest 20. So thanks again, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.